Hello and welcome to Sticky from the Inside, the employee engagement podcast that looks at how to build stickier, competition-smashing, consistently successful organisations from the inside out. I'm your host, Andy Gorham, and I'm on a mission to help more businesses turn the lights on behind the eyes of their employees, light the fires within them, and create tons more success for everyone. This podcast is for all those who believe that's something worth going after and would like a little help and guidance in achieving that. Each episode, we dive into the topics that can help create what I call stickier businesses. The sort of businesses where people thrive and love to work, and where more customers stay with you and recommend you to others because they love what you do and why you do it. So, if you want to take the tricky out of being sticky, listen on. Okay, there's no doubt the world has changed quite dramatically of late. We've been hit with COVID, remote, hybrid and home working are now more commonplace. The climate change issue is playing out right before our very eyes. Social media is more prevalent and seems to be a major contributing factor to the increased polarization we see in society and in generational thinking, actually. On top of all that, we're also beginning to get more comfortable talking about and recognizing mental health challenges. And 2 years of the pandemic have allowed us to sit, think, and consider what really matters to us. The Great Resignation or Great Reflection has seen and is seeing people take more control of choosing what they really want from a work and home life. Is it any wonder then, in the face of all that change, that the old style of command and control leadership is now more unsustainable or inappropriate than ever before? So what does the future of leadership look like? Look, I've long since talked about the need for more humanity from leaders on this podcast, but what does that practically look like? And how do we affect that change? Well, with me today is Casper Craven. He's a leading authority in achieving big, bold goals through high-performance teamwork and the author of 3 best-selling books on leadership and teams, Where the Magic Happens, Be More Human, and his latest work, Big, Bold Goals. Now, as a serial entrepreneur, he's built and sold a tech business for a 7-figure sum, worked as a CFO and at KPMG, and not content with that, he has twice sailed around the world, the first time as a team leader on a trophy-winning yacht race for the BT Global Challenge, and then the second time as captain and team leader of his family team in around 2014, 2016, with his wife and 3 young children under 10 years of age, which I think is just incredible. And today, literally, I cannot wait to talk to him and hear his theories and practical advice on what the future of successful leadership really does look like. Welcome to the show, Casper.
Andy, thank you very much. And thank you for those kind words. Goodness me, there's an expectation there. I don't know who that person is you just described.
Well, I'm hoping it's you, buddy. I'm really hoping it's you.
We'll give it a go, shall we?
Fantastic. Look, I would be daft if I didn't ask you a couple of things. First of all, just give me a rundown of what's going on in your life right now. What are you focused on? What's really sort of exercising the old grey cells at the moment? And then perhaps let's have a little quick chat about taking 3 kids under 10 around the world on a yacht. I mean, that sounds incredible.
Yeah, what's exercising my grey matter is thinking very much about how do we lead our teams going into the future. What are the things that we need to do? So, I've had a whole bunch of different experiences, and that's given me a lot of different insights, learning at extremes. And I've taken that and then just sort of looking at all these things that are changing in the world, that definition of insanity, doing the same thing but expecting a different result. When everything is moving around you, if you keep doing the same thing, then it ain't going to work. So, what's exercising my grey matter is how do we really rethink what's going on at the moment and, help teams in organizations around the world to be able to get to grips with some of those challenges, those changes. Because you said that there's a lot changing at the moment. So that's what's really exercising me, sort of talking to people, sharing thoughts and ideas around that.
And are you seeing this is becoming, or has the world woken up to all these changes and the impact from leadership? Because you've been talking about leadership and teams for a good while now. Is there now more momentum perhaps than there has been before, or is it always been this way?
So I think there's definitely more momentum. So, I mean, one of the themes that I always talk about is the fact that we all have two teams, a work team and a home team, and neglect either one at your peril. I know that from harsh experience, having done that. and I think that COVID rammed that home to everyone. And so I think that there's definitely more awareness of things like that. And as the world sort of drifts moves to a different state, I hope we remember that and the humanity of how do we operate. But look, I think across all the different organizations that I'm lucky enough to speak to, there's definitely a lot of people moving this direction. Not everyone, but I think that the best talent and customers will migrate to the people who really take care of people, planet, and so on. So it's there's a movement underway, I would say.
Well, that's good to hear. It's good to hear. It's still quite a confusing thought for me, for people who rally against this thought that adding humanity into leadership is a good thing. It's not going to harm the numbers. From my perspective, it's going to accentuate those numbers, but it's still curious to me. But before we get into all of that, I have to ask you, I mean, taking 3 kids under 10 around the world, I mean, around the supermarket would probably freak a lot of people out. But no, let's stick them on a yacht and take them around the world. I mean, clearly you are I'll use the incorrect term, a sailor, a yachtsman. You know how to do this stuff, but still, that's a challenge, right?
Yeah, at this point, most people probably think I'm a little bit crazy, right? I'll praise it. 5 years of preparation in order to go and do that. Yeah, it's a story that we wrote together as a family. Clearly, my wife and I led the discussions, saying let's go and experience and see the world together. And we came up with the idea. And I said, 5 years of planning to think through every single eventuality that we could imagine. And most people told us what could go wrong. So it wasn't too hard to find those different things, and then find ways to mitigate all those challenges. But the draw of it was spending time with our kids, seeing the world with them. Because I remember sort of working 16, 18 hours a day and not seeing my kids, and it's like, well, what's the point of having kids if you don't see them and share what's really important with them? So that was kind of the motivating factor. And I know what we did was probably was at the more extreme end of things, but it was an incredible experience.
I was going to say, what an experience, and something that you to share as a family. I mean, that must have brought you some incredible memories, much, much closer, stretched yourself. There probably would have been some scary moments, I would have thought, within that as well. And what that's done for you as a family, I'm sure, is amazing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely a really sort of strong bedrock of experiences there, of highs, of lows, because you take 2 years, any 2 year period of time, and you're going to have a bunch of those highs and lows and tantrums and laughter and everything else.
That's just the parents.
Exactly. It's like, it's funny you're saying about the anything with the kids. But it's like, driving down to Devon for 4 hours in the car. It's like, some child's going to have a tantrum, don't you? It's just a question of which one it is or how many it's going to be. So
absolutely. I always found those long road trips with kids fascinating. Some of the smells that would come from the back seat particularly are very strong in the memory, I think, as we go forward. But that's not really what we're here to talk about today. So let's park that, and let's think about this thing about the future of leadership. So we've talked about there seemingly being a change in momentum, or at least building some momentum going forward. What's really changed, do you think? And we mentioned a few things in the intro. What have those things done to the whole sphere of leadership from your perspective? What's changed?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And by the way, I'll have a tilt at this question, and then I'd like to flip this back to you and your take as well, because you obviously speak to lots of different interesting people and we'll have an interesting perspective on this. Let me have a tilt. What's changed? I mean, clearly the COVID is very fresh in our minds. And there's definitely something that shifted there and brought a great realization, I think, of how do we work and how do we live. So that's definitely one. But I think the biggest one, of course, has to be sustainability and climate change, and thinking about the types of organizations that we want to work for, the ones that actually are going to make a difference to something that's going on in the world. I went to a talk actually at my son's school 2 weeks ago, and it was a lady who runs Microsoft in Europe, and she was saying how their plan is to actually counteract all the emissions that Microsoft has put out into the world, going right back to the day that they were founded.
Wow.
And it's like, okay, I like that. That's a good, bold statement. And of course, organizations like that, you make you say, well, maybe you can go further as well. And sort of, who else? Because I think it's, why shouldn't organizations take a big lead on this?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's definitely changed. And I think one of the other big things I see as well is the challenges that we have around our mental health, and how do we deal with those? We're all living in a very, very different way these days. We're all sort of, connected to one of these sort of on a continual basis. And, it's rewiring our brains. It's changing our brains. So I think that recognition of that. I mean, there's many more, but those I think are probably the first three things that I would tilt. So what would you add to the list, Andy? What do you see?
I think one of the things that I've noticed the most is the generational shift. So I liken it a bit to the Alex Ferguson football years, because I think he's quite an interesting study. And look, there'll be loads of people listening to this who go, "You don't know Alex Ferguson." Okay, this is my impression. Okay. I'm sure he fostered amazing team spirit, real belief, all those kind of good staples of leadership, but he was no pushover, right? Mm-hmm. If there was command and control, my impression was that there was a lot of that with him, to a point. And I think a range of players came through of a different generation where I think he finally sort of realized that his approach to leadership didn't work with them as well as it worked with previous generations. He couldn't rule with an iron fist, perhaps, like he had done before. They were looking for something different, and they rebelled against that kind of leadership. And I think we're seeing that in the workplace. I think people are definitely looking for more from work. I think they're less interested in hierarchy. So the sort of flattening of, well, my boss said it, so therefore it must be true. I think there's a lot more curiosity and questioning going on. Yes. And when I left my last corporate job on that sort of day, apart from blubbing everywhere because I was, what am I doing? The CEO at the time very nicely said to me, "Andy's proof that good guys can succeed." And I've always had this thing in my soul that is, I'm very much about relationships and collaboration and care. And for me, that's just a natural leadership trait. I just think it's becoming more of a leadership trait of choice, because I think it speaks to a lot more people nowadays. That's my take on it. Yeah, no, it looks really interesting, actually. Just sort of hearing you say that sparked some other thoughts. Well, I mean, the whole thing about, the relationships. I mean, it's like I look back at the businesses that I've built. So one of the businesses I built and we sold that. For me, that was all about the creating business success and driving sort of really hard for that. And, that frankly, that was about money, and that was painful growing that. But actually, I look back on the times, and what was the most valuable thing, although I definitely didn't appreciate it at the time, was the relationships, the people you spend time with. And so I made that classic mistake of valuing sort of profits over people, which is why I'm so passionate about flipping it around the other way and really sort of appreciating. It's like, who are you actually going to spend time with, a chunk of time with? And, make sure you enjoy it, make sure it's meaningful relationships, make sure you're curious, make sure you learn from each other, make sure you help each other out. And I think, one of my fundamental things, it's a happy team is a fast team rather than just sort of a fast team as a happy team. So it's, really enjoying those relationships, being aware of them. So I think it's true. I mean, I do look back. I mean, I was no saint. Let's be really clear about that. I definitely made mistakes. I think you realize it. When it was silly little things for me, like when I moved from open plan, sitting with the team into an office, marvelous, right? All the trappings of having an office. But then I would come out of my office to try and engage with the team, and I felt like an awkward dad at a teenager's disco, like just waiting for a conversation to sort of bring me in and allow me to sort of like contribute. And I felt awkward, and I knew I was losing my grip at that point, and I'd lost sight of what was important. For sure. So that's why I think And it's the same today. Relationships are really important. And I'm not really up for veneer relationships. I think it has to be meaningful. And again, I don't want to sound overly worthy and all sort of hippie about the whole thing, because I'm far from that. But I just think results come when you have all these things sorted out. You know, if you go to the Lencioni 5 dysfunctions of a team, you know, that you might as well. If my daughter keeps saying to me, "You ever going to get a tattoo, Dad?" I'm like, "No, I'm not the kind of person to have a tattoo." But if I was going to have a tattoo, weirdly, I might have his 5 dysfunctions of a team as the pyramid as a tattoo, because I think it's a metaphor for lots of things in life, and building trust and enabling to challenge each other, I think, are the absolute fundamentals of teamwork and leadership.
You know, I mean, with that, I mean, that to me brings the whole sort of, the vulnerability, the humility. And yes. I think, that's probably the single best reason as well for the making sure you've got the right relationships, because none of us will ever have all the skills that we all need. And therefore, it's without question the most important thing to, build on the strengths of other people, appreciate where you're good, appreciate where other people are good. And to say, you know what, there's this thing over here, I've tried really hard at doing this, but actually I'm just not very good at doing this. Yes, I could get better, but I might get a 10, 20% improvement. But you're amazing at this thing. So you focus on doing this thing. I'll focus on doing this thing here. But again, you can only get to that stage when you sort of, have that vulnerability to really start sharing with people. So
I think that's a great point. And I think for years we've had this myth of the shell that you must protect yourself with, to sort of say, I am rock solid, I'm granite, I've got it all, come with me, I'm the leader of choice because I won't let you down, I've got all the answers. And I just think that's out of date. And I've mentioned it before in this podcast, and anybody that's been through any leadership stuff with me will know this. As a human, you've got an innate desire to help other people, but if you can smell that they don't need help, you move on to the next person. So as a leader, if you're saying I've got it all covered, you are going to really struggle to get engagement long term.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting. I think about, one of the first people to really shine a light on this was Carol Dweck with growth mindset. And I look back on the way that, I developed in sort of early career. And I was 100% classic fixed mindset. And it was presenting a story and presenting it. I even remember sort of going to work. I had my home face on, like, here's the corporate face, and go and do all that sort of stuff and do the things that I thought I was meant to do, but it never really tapped into sort of the talents, the creativity, because I was trying to project this thing the whole time, which actually wasn't that accurate. And it's I think it's it's opening up those conversations so we can be more real, isn't it? I mean, there's lots of language around this, isn't authentic leadership and so on, but I think fundamentally it's not being afraid to be vulnerable. But I know in some workplaces that people, I mean, the phrase obviously around this is psychological safety.
Yeah.
Some people don't feel safe to do that, which is why I think it's so important for leaders to take the lead on this. And to share the things where they're not great, to show that humility and to make it okay for other people to do that. And certainly there's a number of organizations I work with where, there's still that fear there. And it's like, that it's going to be tricky. You're going to struggle to adapt to the changes because you're not unleashing the best talent inside your business because nobody feels that safe. So
I think that's true. And I think as leaders now, if you take the metaphor of the iceberg model, lowering the water level on that iceberg allows you to see a lot more things, make a lot less assumptions, know a lot more things. And the minute you can see this stuff, you can start to fix it. You can start to do stuff with it. And that's where I think this openness, this vulnerability, whatever you want to call it, is really important. And I think that's one of those factors that draws people in as opposed to putting them off. Yeah. And as a leader, I think you want to draw as many people in as possible to your clan and make the right moves going forward.
So where are you going to get your tattoo done then?
Yeah, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I mean, I think I have the ultimate dad bod. There's no question about that. I'm just not. If I would just look weird with a tattoo, Casper. I'm not. Are you a tattooed man yourself?
No. So actually, we're sailing across the Pacific. There was a place. My tattoos apparently sort of originated from the Marquesa Islands.
Yeah.
And that was the closest I got to it. But I thought, nah, it's not going to.
I just would look like a fool. I might go for a henna tattoo at a festival to try and like be part of the crew, but I know that's going to like not be there in a few weeks' time. But
yes,
that's another generational shift. It seems like you've got to ink yourself today to sort of, be yourself, but it's just not my thing.
It really does, doesn't it? So it's no. Actually, funny enough, I know we're getting completely off topic here, but I did actually get a henna tattoo done while I was saying. Actually, I'd forgotten about that, but yeah, 12 days later it had gone. So it's,
yeah, give me a friendship bracelet any day because I know that's fine, but a tattoo, that's going a step too far for me. I'm quite keen to understand in this context of this changing leadership landscape. The link between two of your books, right? So the Be More Human, which really drew me in, and your link to those 20 principles, which I have written down the side of me here, and your big bold goals focus right now. I mean, when I read the 20 principles, I was kind of like, yeah, I really get those. They really resonate with me. And when we think about this landscape change right now, I can clearly see why you're trying to link that to sort of, I guess, definitive performance, but really setting out your stall to achieve, right, through big, bold goals. Yeah. How can you explain to the listeners that link between those 20 principles? Where do they come from? And your focus now on big, bold goals.
Yeah, okay. So let me start with where the 20 principles came from. I mean, so in the 5 years preparing for our sailing adventure, I always believe, by the way, you learn a lot more at the extremes when you put yourself under pressure. And so I've definitely done that on both my sailing trips. And so I learned a lot, both about work and family, hence the two teams. Mm-hmm. And so 5 years preparing, 2 years sailing, and then sort of being on the speaking circuit after I came back from that. And then just sort of speaking to some incredible people around the world, spending a huge amount of time reading, huge amount of time reflecting, and saying, okay, what are the skills that we need to be able to move forward? And it was that period of, if you like, introspection, reflection, which led me to those 20 principles. A lot of them are definitely born out of my experiences. I often say that there's 20 principles, but there's also 20 whopping great big mistakes that I've made in there. So that was basically the journey to that. And it's kind of, so I came up with them, sat down and write them out, and then just benchmarked them against lots of very successful, very interesting, very pragmatic, very curious people that I had the privilege of bumping into. So that was basically how the 20 principles arose. And then how does that juxtaposition with big bold goals? So like my whole thing is about sort of whenever someone says something that it can't be done, my instant reaction is that, is that really true? And so I love going after the things that everybody else says are impossible. There's just something inside me that is just drawn towards that. But I think there's this innate assumption that in order to go and achieve massive goals, you have to be like old style, just drive for the numbers, and that whole sort of mindset around that. So for me, the juxtaposition is going after the massive goals, but doing it in a way that is fundamentally more human. It puts empathy, it puts compassion, it puts understanding. It puts a lot of topics on the table that a lot of people, what I would describe in the old numbers-driven world, fundamentally are uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
So the whole area about sort of the emotional understanding, I have this notion, it's someone else shared this, that we're not thinking creatures who feel, we're feeling creatures who think.
Brilliant.
And it's our emotions that really drive us. And once you start to understand that, then I think that that's certainly that sort of shone a huge light on things for me. And actually, that's the place to start, in the emotional place, rather than the place of logic. So that's the juxtaposition between the two things.
And so this emotion thing and this kind of change of leadership, I get the impression you've kind of echoed it yourself, that there are leaders out there who are almost scared of the topic of emotion. It's not their bag. They don't know how to deal with it. It looks amorphous. I've got to take a separate approach for every single individual. I haven't got time for that. What would you say to leaders who are really wrestling with this whole kind of, look, numbers is where I'm at, or that more functional, technical leadership role to the more emotionally led leadership role. How do you encourage people to kind of make the change?
Yeah. So one of the things is actually a little bit of theory. So I had a graph a little while ago, and basically it showed all the different management theories over the last 5 decades or so. And depending on what point you came into the workplace, you were kind of like, if you like, indoctrinated in that management theory. And there's 20, 30 of these sort of over the past 50 years. So a question of that, and when was the last time that one had an upgrade to how one thinks about things? Because how stuff operates is fundamentally different to how it was 3 decades ago. So that's, I guess, the first thing. It's just, what's your lens? What's shaping your beliefs at the moment? Why do you believe so strongly that it is just about the numbers?
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of context for that. And again, it's useful when you just sort of see how many different theories there have been, and there will be more in the future as well, of course. So how would I encourage someone to think about the emotional thing? I think, and I'd probably sort of ask someone to sort of just to sit down and reflect on their own experiences. Why do you do things? And to really sort of, I always encourage people to sit down with a blank piece of paper and a pen and sit down and sketch and sort of and scribble things out. And I think that what I notice is that it's the emotions that start us off on that journey, and then we backfill it with logic. And if you struggle with that, ask someone who knows you well, hold a mirror up to you, and listen and to hear the feedback that comes back from that. None of us are immune to emotions. We all experience emotions, and it's just the way we operate as human beings, isn't it? So
I think so. And I think we have to embrace it more. To ignore it is folly, ultimately. And like I say, this generational shift coming through expects more emotional connection.
So I was going to say about that, I know we chatted before, we talked about this notion of the feminization of the workplace.
Yeah.
This came up in conversation with someone I know. I was talking about emotions in the workplace. And he mentioned this phrase, this is about the feminization of the workplace. And I have to say, my jaw kind of hit the floor at that point.
It sounds like a ridiculous statement. I've got to be honest.
It's quite a punchy statement, isn't it?
Yeah.
What was the statistic I read recently? I think it was in the construction industry. Mm-hmm. The single biggest killer of men under the age of 50 is suicide. And I think in the construction industry, it's 4x that.
Wow.
And you think sort of, we all experience emotions. We all experience strong emotions. And if someone says, well, you can't talk about your emotions because you're being female, you're being a girl, whatever else, it's like, well, that closes that down, especially if you're in a construction, particularly macho industry, right? Mm-hmm. A male-dominated industry. So it's like, well, doesn't that just that data just speak for itself, that we have to be able to sort of deal with our emotions, we have to be able to express them, we have to be able to understand them. And to deny them is it's folly. I mean, it's just they're there.
That's a horrible, horrible statistic, and all to do with avoiding emotions. And this is where, there's another lead in for me, and again, a regular soapbox for me, is when we talk about this kind of leadership, caring leadership, human leadership, and you think about the skills underneath it, they're always referred to as soft skills, yes. Which I hate as a phrase, because they just sound, I don't know, second class for some reason behind the other skills, because these are soft skills. And these human skills, as I like to sort of call them, I would be absolutely lobbying for these things to be taught at school, to be thinking about teamwork and humanity and collaboration rather than the kind of individualistic pursuit of stuff. Because I think they're, as you've used the word, they are completely juxtaposed to what's needed in society today.
Absolutely. And look, I mean, they are the hardest skills I have personally had to acquire.
Yeah.
The ones of emotional understanding, because it means that you've got to stare at the mirror. And that's really uncomfortable and that's really hard. I love that saying. It came from Ray Dalio, and that pain plus reflection equals progress. that we all have repeating patterns in our lives, don't we? And if you have a pain point in one area, you can bet your bottom dollar it appears everywhere. So for me, two of my flaws, my weaknesses in the past, which I've done a lot of work to mitigate, I'm not saying they're completely gone, is blame, thinking other people's fault rather than owning it myself.
Nice.
And not listening enough. And what I've noticed is that both those patterns were following me around at work and at home. And for far too long I was in denial about that. And the only way out of that is to sit there, to stare hard and say, I always like to think of the notion, whatever that pain point is, to put it on your hand and hold it up there in front of you and twist it round to look at it from every single angle. And I think I used the phrase in my book, to go and soak in that pain, which is horrible. It's hard as to go and do that, but so there's nothing soft about that, and those are the hard things to do. But I think that a lot of people obviously don't do that, but I think that's when you get the greatest amount of growth. When you overcome those things, you can move forward. So
I think so. It's the easiest thing to avoid, isn't it? But actually spending time really facing into it, I think, has huge dividends. I spoke to Jane Adshad Grant recently, who's done a lot of work with the Barry Y. Miller stuff and wrote a book, Are You Listening or Just Waiting to Speak? And and the title of that book is just classic, because I look back at my early career and my active listening was a lot of nodding and all the rest of it, but whilst I was nodding and making noises, I was trying to work out what I'm going to say next, not listening at all. So your point about not listening enough, well made. And I think that's another trait for leadership going forward, is properly listen, learn to listen.
Yes. Yeah. I think actually one of the things that follows on from that is just allowing those spaces in the conversation, and not feeling the need just to fill that space, and just to sort of sit there and just take what someone's just said. Okay, let me just think about that for a moment. Being so often is sort of in a sort of a large environment, a large group environment, the conversation's flying like this, and it's almost like competition, isn't it? So who's going to say the next thing, isn't it? And actually, it's to just sort of, I'm just going to pause on that, reflect on that for a moment. And, we don't have to have all the answers immediately. It'd be nice, but just to really take the time. But I guess the other challenge with that comes back to this whole sort of mental health thing, is that we end up sort of self-medicating ourselves with just continual doses of sort of inbound information that social media and so on, and it's just checking at us the whole time, and other people numb things with other stuff, like alcohol, drugs, or whatever else is their way of dealing with it. But sometimes it's just creating that space to listen and really hear the message, isn't it, from yourself, from others. So
I mean, I would expect. Well, I mean, you go around the world speaking to audiences about this sort of stuff, and as a professional speaker, you must know the power of the pause when you're trying to sort of engage an audience. That when you drop a large thought, the last thing you want to do is then career all over that with a load more information. You want to stop.
Yes.
You want to allow the audience to kind of soak up that point.
Yes.
Look them in the eye and recognize this is now landed, have a think about it before you kind of move on. To me, it's exactly the same in a one-to-one or any sort of other conversation. And actually, even as a podcast host,
it really is, isn't it? It's yes. I'm sort of my mind's wandering off in all sorts of different directions now, just as you're saying that. It's sort of, I mean, that's the beauty, isn't it? Because you say something and it just sort of, it sets your mind off in a different direction that it wasn't going to before, by virtue of what you've heard, by virtue, rather than this is the next thing that I'm going to go and say. So really interesting space.
Having said that, one thing I'm really interested to kind of like have a chat about on here, when we originally spoke and we were talking about the future of human leadership and talking about team performance, you mentioned something I thought really interesting, new work that you're looking into, really, about this unresolved trauma and how it inhibits team performance on almost a hidden level today. Tell us what's going on with that whole topic.
Yeah, so I think this is one of those topics that is very easily dismissible as saying, oh, that's all woo-woo stuff. And just like actually sort of 5 years ago when I was talking about, work life, home life, and paying attention to that got quite easily dismissed as well. Not anymore. And I think that trauma is very much in the same space. And look, I think that all of us have trauma on some level. And I'll tell you what I mean by trauma. It means you have some emotional experience, some strong emotional experience from the past. We've all had those, haven't we? And when a trigger comes up, when something comes up, it flips you straight back into that state, which means you're no longer here in the present. There's a disassociation. I know that the psychologists will give a better definition of it than that, but that's my simplistic understanding of that. And, I think, I used to sort of grow up talking to my mum, and the word trauma came up. She said, well, you haven't been to war. You haven't got trauma. And it's like, well, no, I haven't. But I still get some sort of, I think emotional dysregulation is one of the phrases that I hear. So why is that important? Well, I think that fundamentally one of the reasons that we don't operate well as teams is because of these unresolved things. So rather than dealing with exactly what you've got here in the present in front of you, you're dealing with stuff from the past that's bringing up and shaping discussion, or you're trying to escape towards the future. That was my flavor of choice. I think that really getting underneath the skin of that is fascinating. There's some amazing work around this. There's a guy called Bessel van der Kolk who wrote a book, The Body Keeps the Score. And just sort of exploring different ways that this can be resolved. Because the other thing around this as well is the traditional way of resolving this is what you might call talk therapy, where you sit down and there's that whole sort of, perception of psychologists sitting on the couch and so on. And actually, there are myriad more ways to resolve this. And basically, it's about reconnecting the cognitive brain and the emotional brain. And again, when you go back to that notion, we're feeling creatures. Think we're driven by emotions. So until you understand what's really driving your emotions, then you don't really understand yourself fundamentally. So, which I know is a fairly punchy thing to say, but I think that this is such an interesting space. And I would describe myself as an enthusiastic amateur in this space. I'm very privileged to actually be working with two different teams. One by they're both run by clinicians. One's a consultant psychiatrist. One has been operating in the trauma space for several decades. And speaking to them and understanding how this stuff is operating. And it feels like there's a massive disconnect because how this stuff is understood, how it's resolved, it's kind of like up here. How the world understands things is kind of down here. There's a massive, almost like sort of marketing gap between understanding what these different things are available and what the impact of these is. So for me, I'm kind of really keen just to shine a light on that at the moment and make people more aware of this and to be more open-minded to going on journeys to uncover what's really driving your behaviors.
It does make a lot of sense because any past experience influences your action in a new experience, right? If you've been stung by a bee as a kid, there's a good chance you're going to be scared of bees. I know that's a terrible example, but ultimately all of these things end up inhibiting your performance or your ideas or your confidence on other things, right, going forward. So why would it be any difference in work environment?
Absolutely. And but the thing is, so many of these things sit beneath the surface that we can't cognitively remember what those experiences are. It doesn't mean so they don't exist. And I remember it was my business who years ago basically said to me, it's like, well, you need to go and get a coach, someone to hold the mirror up to you. And it's like, no, I don't need that. I'm all right. And that classic thing. And I think this is exactly the same thing. That for years I was in denial that I needed to look at anything around this. And, I kind of think that actually paying attention to our mental health, I think it should be one of those things that we treat almost like doing exercise. You don't do it when there's a problem and you're overweight or anything else like that. You do it as a regular thing to stay fit and healthy. So whether that's sort of, every fortnight, every month, every 2 months, whatever it is, to go and sort of have some outlets. And it'll be different for different types of people. Everyone will have their different flavors of doing things. But something that leans into that space especially given the pressures, the social media and all these sorts of things. It's really putting a lot more pressure on that. So I think that I would love to see it becomes a normal conversation around that.
I would too. On reflection, I think the more that we understand about each other, the better. Your point that we're emotional creatures is so well made, and I think leaders going forward have to recognize that and quickly adapt if it's not their strong suit to make things different. Jasper, I cannot believe it, but we are coming towards the end of our time already, and yet we've covered so much, so little. I know, exactly. Just what? Well, look, I have an area in the show as we get to the end where I try to summarize all the things that we've talked about. And I say I try to summarize. That's a lie. I ask you to summarize. And what I would like you to do is to try and condense some of the things we've talked about today into 3 pieces of advice that you could stick on a sticky note and that people could take away. So when we're thinking about the future of leadership, what would you put on your 3 sticky notes, Casper?
Yeah, okay. So everyone got a sticky note ready? And out. I'm going to give you a formula for the first one.
Okay.
I've already shared it already today, but it's pain plus reflection equals progress.
Brilliant.
We all have pain points in our lives, don't we? To just to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, sit down on your own, switch your phone off, and just reflect. What's the pain? What's the most painful thing I'm experiencing right now? And just to take some time to reflect on that. And it's in that reflection process, when we give ourselves the space to do that, we often find new ideas, new insights, different ways to think about it. Someone else, we go and ask for help around it. But we then give ourselves the space to do that. So that's my first one. Pain plus reflection equals progress.
Love that.
The second one, I think, is to celebrate curiosity. I think that the leaders of the future are the ones who recognize that the answers can come from anywhere in your team, and to ask questions and to then shut up, sit back and listen and just sort of, be amazed at what are the things that come out. And then the third thing is I'm kind of like drawn to sort of, having just talked all about the trauma space, I'm inclined to sort of lean towards that for everyone, just to sort of have a conversation with themselves about, what could you do differently around your mental health? And there's so many different things you can do, whether it's doing more exercise, meditation, talking to someone, different types of therapy, but actually just to sort of be open-minded to different things around that. And it's funny, I always find when I regularly do different therapies and stuff like that, because I every time I do that, I get massive breakthroughs. And the time when I don't think I've got a problem, when there's nothing that's really going on for me, without question, those are the times when I get massive insights, which I was never expecting.
Always the way, isn't it? Always the way.
Yeah. When I go with a problem, I get the problem solved. But actually, it's when I go without a problem, with a blank sheet of paper, and it's like, oh, this is going to be interesting. Where's it going to
go? Much like these conversations. Casper, amazing. To your point, I feel like we've literally only scratched the surface. That time has gone far too quickly for me. It's been an absolute pleasure to have met you and to speak to you today. And thank you for sharing your wisdom, advice, experience on what we think the future of leadership looks like. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Look, it's been really great to have a conversation, to be honest. I mean, that's what this is about, isn't it? Having more conversations which are more real. So
100%, my friend. Those meaningful conversations that are real. Couldn't have put it better myself. All right, my friend, you take care, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.
Fantastic. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, mate. Okay, that was Casper Craven, and if you'd like to find out a bit more about him or any of the topics that we've covered in today's show, please check out the show notes. So, that concludes today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it, found it interesting, and heard something maybe that will help you become a stickier, more successful business from the inside going forward. If you have, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps. I'm Andy Gorham, and you've been listening to the Sticky from the Inside podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening.